Unpredictability is leverage, not a weakness, not a diplomatic failure, leverage. And the man who has proven this more consistently than any Fortune 500 CEO, any hedge fund titan, any Harvard-trained negotiator, is a man who executes his own generals with anti-aircraft guns and launches missiles on public holidays. Kim Jong-un has walked away from deals that would have fed his starving population. He has humiliated sitting American presidents. He has extracted billions in aid from South Korea and China, while giving up absolutely nothing of substance. And the Western analysts who study him keep making the same catastrophic mistake. They call him irrational. He is not irrational. He is operating from a completely different psychological playbook, one that behavioral economists have mapped, that dark triad researchers have documented, and that elite negotiators in the private sector quietly study but publicly refuse to acknowledge. Because acknowledging it would mean admitting something deeply uncomfortable, that psychopathic negotiation tactics work. That the traits we pathologize in clinical settings produce results in power settings. That the ruthless, the unpredictable, and the shameless consistently extract more value from negotiations than the reasonable, the collaborative, and the reputation conscious. This video is going to break down exactly how Kim Jong-un negotiates, not as a political commentary, not as a moral endorsement, as a case study in applied dark triad psychology. Truth. You are going to understand 3 specific power moves that autocratic negotiators deploy that Western counterparts systematically refuse to use, and why that refusal costs them. We are going to pull in Daniel Kahneman's loss aversion framework, Richard Thaler's endowment effect, Robert Cialdini's influence mechanics, and real documented negotiation outcomes. By the end of this, you will look at every high-stakes conversation you have differently, every boardroom standoff, every investor meeting, every partnership dissolution. You will see the leverage that was always there and that you were conditioned not to use. Let us begin. Section 1. The weaponization of irrationality. In 1994, the United States and North Korea signed the agreed framework. North Korea agreed to freeze its nuclear program. The US agreed to provide fuel oil and help build light water reactors. For 8 years, the Clinton administration and then the early Bush administration operated on the assumption that North Korea was a rational actor with predictable incentives. Feed them, accommodate them, and they will comply. They did not comply. And this is the first lesson. Daniel Kahneman's foundational work on cognitive biases shows us that humans systematically assume that other agents in a negotiation share their basic reference frame. We project our own risk tolerance, our own institutional pressures, our own time horizons onto the other party. This is what Kahneman calls the inside view. You model the negotiation from inside your own constraints and assume the other side operates within similar constraints. Rational actors, similar stakes, convergent incentives. The deal should work. Kim Jong-un does not share your reference frame. And more importantly, he knows you assume he does. That gap is where he operates. The weaponization of perceived irrationality is one of the most documented yet least deployed tactics in high-stakes negotiation. Thomas Schelling, the Nobel-winning economist who essentially invented modern game theory applied to conflict, called this the rationality of irrationality. If your opponent genuinely believes you might do something catastrophically self-destructive, your bargaining power increases exponentially. You are no longer a predictable variable they can manage. You become a threat coefficient in every calculation they make. Kim demonstrates this in 2017, when he launches intercontinental ballistic missile tests with a cadence that the US intelligence community cannot predict. Not because the launches are random, they are not, but because the timing, the provocations, and the rhetorical escalations are calibrated to create the perception of someone who might actually push the button. Someone who prioritizes regime ideology over national survival calculus. Someone who cannot be modeled. In business, this principle appears in a sanitized form. We call it Batna theater. The negotiator who credibly signals that walking away is not only possible but preferable. But most business negotiators perform this signal weakly because they are afraid of damaging the relationship. The psychopathic negotiator has no such fear. He will burn the relationship to demonstrate that he can. And paradoxically, that willingness makes the relationship more deferential, not less. The practical extraction, your irrationality ceiling, is determined by how much social approval you need from the other party. Reduce that dependency and your leverage expands. Kim Jong needs no approval from Washington. That is not stupidity. That is structural power. Section 2. The Endowment Effect and the Art of Manufactured Grievance. Richard Thaler won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2017. His endowment effect research demonstrates something that should reshape how you think about every negotiation you enter. People value things they already possess significantly more than equivalent things they do not yet possess. Loss looms larger than gain. Kahneman and Tversky quantified this. Losses feel roughly twice as painful as equivalent gains feel pleasurable. Kim Jong-un has built his entire geopolitical identity around this asymmetry, but he applies it in a direction most people miss. He does not just leverage his own endowment effect. He manufactures grievances on behalf of his counterparts, specifically designed to make them feel they have already lost something they never actually had. Study the 2018 Singapore summit. Trump arrives with genuine optimism. There are photo opportunities, there are handshakes. Trump publicly declares that North Korea is no longer a nuclear threat. What happened? Kim had created the perception of a deal in progress, an emerging peace, a diplomatic victory. Once Trump felt he owned that narrative, the endowment effect locked in. Abandoning negotiations now would feel like a loss. Continuing them, even on North Korean terms, would feel like preserving a gain. Kim extracted a suspension of South Korea military exercises, a significant tangible asymmetric concession. In return, he gave a vague denuclearization promise with no verification mechanism, no timeline, and no enforcement. Trump declared victory. Kim continued building weapons. This is Thaler's endowment effect deployed at the highest level of geopolitical theater. Make your counterpart feel they own the outcome before the deal is done. Once they feel ownership, loss aversion works for you, not against you. They will pay more, concede more, and rationalize more to protect what they believe they have already gained. In venture capital, you see sophisticated versions of this constantly. Once they fork turnois, a founder walks into a term sheet negotiation not by asking for investment, but by generating FOMO, by implying that the round is nearly closed, that another Tier 1 firm is already committed. The moment the investor feels they might miss the deal, they shift from evaluating to preserving. The endowment effect kicks in for something they do not yet possess, because the founder has manufactured the psychological experience of potential loss. This is not deception as performance. It is strategic framing, and Kim does it with nuclear weapons and state media as his instruments. The practical extraction before you negotiate. Ask yourself what your counterpart believes they stand to lose if the deal falls apart. If they believe they stand to lose nothing, you have no leverage. Your first move should always be creating the experience of potential loss before the substantive negotiation begins. Section 3. Cialdini's Scarcity Principle and the Nuclear Option as Positioning Tool. Robert Cialdini's influence framework identifies scarcity as one of the 6 core levers of human persuasion. We want what is rare. We assign higher value to things that are difficult to obtain or that might disappear. This is not a marketing trick. It is a hardwired cognitive shortcut that evolution embedded in human decision-making, because scarcity historically predicted mortal risk. Kim Jong-un's nuclear program is, at its strategic core, a scarcity play, and not in the obvious sense of scarce weapons. Consider what became scarce the moment North Korea successfully demonstrated a miniaturized nuclear warhead capable of reaching the continental United States in 2017. The negotiating window became scarce. The possibility of a non-nuclear Korean peninsula became scarce. The option of a military solution became effectively scarce, because the cost calculus shifted from difficult to potentially civilization-ending. By creating the nuclear fait accompli, Kim manufactured a deadline that was not artificial but permanent. The scarcity of pre-nuclear North Korea is now infinite and irreversible. In negotiation theory, deadline pressure is one of the most well-documented leverage amplifiers. Gary Carras, whose negotiation research influenced generations of corporate dealmakers, demonstrated that a disproportionate percentage of concessions occur in the final phase of a negotiation, precisely because scarcity of time activates loss aversion. Kim's genius is that he did not create a temporary deadline. He created an ontological one. The world before North Korean nuclear capability no longer exists. Negotiate now or negotiate under worse conditions later, but you will always negotiate. This maps to a dark triad trait that researchers Kevin Dutton and Paul Babyak have identified as central to functional psychopathy in leadership contexts, the complete absence of sunk cost paralysis. A psychopathic negotiator does not grieve the options that no longer exist. He positions their disappearance as someone else's problem. Kim does not apologize for closing off military options. Ik haben kwijtdienst, dat ik al ben gestart. he presents the closed window as his negotiating partner's failure to act earlier. The scarcity is your fault for waiting. In private equity, you see this deployed by the most aggressive deal makers. They create artificial scarcity, not through deception, but through genuine exclusivity commitments, hard deadlines tied to operational realities, and the credible communication that the terms available today will not be available tomorrow. The difference between the average negotiator and the elite one is that the average negotiator hopes scarcity is real. The elite one engineers it and believes in its reality enough to hold the line when the counterpart pushes back. The practical extraction, scarcity is most powerful when it is irreversible. A deadline that can be extended is not scarcity, it is theater. Kim's nuclear program is irreversible. What in your negotiation can you make irreversible before the conversation begins? Section 4. Dark Triad dominance and coalition management here is where the Kim Jong-un case study becomes genuinely uncomfortable for Western business psychology, because the third major power move is not about tactics. It is about identity architecture. Researchers Paul Hewson Williams, who formally defined the Dark Triad in 2002, identified three overlapping but distinct personality constructs: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. In clinical contexts, these are liabilities. In power contexts, and specifically in coalition management under conditions of asymmetric power, they function as structural assets. Kim Jong manages three critical negotiating coalitions simultaneously. His domestic elite class, who he keeps in line through a precise combination of material reward and existential terror. His Chinese patrons, who he needs economically, but who he refuses to become subordinate to. And his Western adversaries, who he extracts concessions from by cycling through phases of provocation and calculated engagement. The psychologically remarkable feature of his coalition management is that he applies a completely different behavioral persona to each coalition with no apparent cognitive dissonance. This is pure Machiavellianism as Paul Hewson Williams defined it, a strategic calculating orientation towards social relationships in which the negotiator views relationships as instrumental rather than intrinsic. Kim does not have allies. He has leverage portfolios. China is a leverage portfolio. South Korea is a leverage portfolio. Trump, Biden, and Moon Jae were each instruments he played for different concessions in different phases. Contrast this with how most business leaders manage their coalitions. Board members, investors, key clients, and strategic partners are often treated as relationships with intrinsic value, which they may have on a personal level, but which creates a negotiating handicap. When you care about maintaining the relationship as an end in itself, you will systematically under-extract from that relationship in negotiation contexts. You will leave money on the table. You will accept worse terms. You will grant extensions and accommodations that cost you real resources because you are optimizing for relationship preservation. The Dark Triad leader feels none of this friction. Kim can dine with South Korean President Moon Jae-in in a historic summit, generate global goodwill and aid commitments, and then 6 months later test a new ballistic missile without any apparent psychological cost. There is no dissonance because the relationship was always instrumental. The summit was a tactic. The warmth was deployed. The missile test was the next tactic. Now, I want to be precise here, because the point of this analysis is not to advocate for clinical psychopathy in business. It is to identify what specifically makes the psychopathic negotiator effective, and then ask what the non-pathological version of that capability looks like. The answer is role separation. The ability to enter a negotiation in a defined role with defined objectives, and to subordinate your social needs within that role to your strategic objectives. This is what elite deal lawyers do, what the best M&A advisors do. They are often personally warm, ethical people who can, within the defined context of a negotiation, operate without the relationship friction that costs their clients value. The practical extraction: identify which of your coalitions you are over-investing in emotionally relative to their strategic value. Where are you accepting worse outcomes to preserve relationships that are, in the negotiation context, primarily instrumental? That is where your Dark Triad deficit is costing you most. Section 5. The integration lesson and the ethics question you have to answer. Let us bring this together and then address the question that will be forming in the back of your mind. Kim Jong-un's negotiating success rests on three interlocking mechanisms: the weaponization of perceived irrationality, which expands its threat coefficient beyond what rational actor modeling can contain, the manufactured endowment effect, which makes his counterparts defend imaginary gains using real concessions, the irreversible scarcity play, which eliminates favorable auctions over time and makes the current deal always better than the next one will be. And underneath all three, a coalition management philosophy that treats relationships as leveraged portfolios rather than as ends in themselves. These mechanisms have a documented track record. Between 1994 and today, North Korea received billions in aid, diplomatic recognition it never earned, and suspension of military exercises that represented real security costs to its adversaries. It did this while expanding its nuclear and ballistic missile program from nascent capability to a credible deterrent against the world's largest military power. By any objective negotiating standard, this is an extraordinary outcome extracted from a position of extraordinary structural weakness. Now, the ethics question. The discomfort you may be feeling right now is itself a data point. It is loss aversion operating on your moral framework. You feel that acknowledging the effectiveness of these tactics implies endorsing the regime that uses them. That is a cognitive fusion error. Understanding how a weapon works is not the same as firing it at civilians. Surgeons study fatal wounds. Forensic accountants study fraud schemes. Negotiation strategists should study the full spectrum of what works, including what works when deployed by people with no ethical constraints. The question that matters for you, as an entrepreneur, as a manager, as an investor, is not whether Kim Jong-un is a good person. He is not. The question is which of these mechanisms operate in your professional context, in a bounded, legal, ethical form, and whether your current reluctance to deploy them is based on genuine ethical reasoning or on social approval conditioning that you have mistaken for ethics. The negotiator who never signals irrationality because they fear seeming unreasonable is not more ethical than Kim Jong-un. They are just less effective and equally subject to the same psychological architecture. The founder who never creates genuine scarcity because they worry it will seem manipulative is not operating from purer motives. They are leaving value on the table while telling themselves a story about integrity. Elite negotiators, the ones who consistently outperform across contexts, have resolved this. They maintain genuine ethical constraints on what they will do and to whom. And within those constraints, they operate without apology, without social approval dependency, and without the reflexive reasonableness that turns negotiating positions into starting points for the other side's extraction. The man in Pyongyang, behind the opaque sunglasses and the military uniform, is running a masterclass in power dynamics that the world's best business schools will never put on the syllabus. Not because the lessons are unavailable, because they are too uncomfortable to teach. You just took the class anyway. If that changes how you think about power, subscribe.